So let me see now. Our next speaker is a magazine entrepreneur. He's an event impresario. He's a man who believes that cities, particularly the big cities of the world, are the engines of the new economy and the new culture. And he's a guy whose next revenue stream is going to be a media business. Who can I be talking about? No, it's John Battelle. John is an American who, along with his partner, Brett Marchand of Cassette Ad Agency, our neighbors in Liberty Village, are going to introduce you to a great new idea called NewCo and give you a taste of NewCo by introducing you to some exceptional local companies who are already doing well but are poised for a big breakup.
Absolutely.
John Battelle.
Thank you, Moses. Thank you very much. I'm going to start by asking you guys to pose for a photo, because this is the coolest stage in all of Canada, and I'm on it. Say hello. There you go. All right. Awesome. I have like a three-part thing. I have one that's empty, one with you filing in, and then that one, and I'm sending it to my family. So, anyway, what I want to talk about is not so much NewCo, because you're going to meet 5 extraordinary companies, all of whom are from here. And all of whom have big missions. I want to talk about the story that is driving the creation of these companies. And so I like to call it the biggest shift in capitalism since the Industrial Revolution. I really believe deeply. I come from the world of technology. I was one of the co-founders of Wired. We wrote about Moses in our second issue, which was in 1993. And we really believed deeply back then that technology was the story, the whole story. And we got out in the middle of the street in 6-color neon inks and screamed that the revolution was coming. Well, it's here. It's happened. Now what, is my question. And it strikes me that the revolution of technology has actually just been the first step to a revolution in how we practice business and what we expect from business. I call this old company thinking and new company thinking. At Wired, we called it Wired and Tired. You might remember that. But now it's OldCo, NewCo. And we've had a model for 5 decades and been based on mass consumerism, right? And mass media and making one widget and selling it to as many people as possible. But now a new kind of company makes an experience or a service that's customized at scale, but for one person. The internet has clearly been the first harbinger of this, but there's much more. In traditional sort of Fordist, that's Henry Ford, or Taylorist approaches to capitalism, the human being is a human resource that is replaceable when it wears out, right? It's a commodity. You can get more of them. But in NewCo, the human being is the key asset of the company. It is the company. Everything else is commodity, but human creativity and the ability to do interesting work is a key asset, and companies are now organized around that idea. In a traditional old approach to how we think about business, we say, well, we're going to make one product, we're going to make it really good and sell it for a while, and then we'll think about making another one, right? And in the product development cycle is very slow. With automobiles, it's 5 years. With other products, with consumer packaged goods, it might be 1 or 2 years. But a product is always changing, always iterating when you have software and technology as your underpinning. It's always iterating. This next one is a bit tough, but material versus information first. Any of you out there, ecology students or biology or science? There's a living systems theory which has been applied to business. And living systems says there's sort of flows of information, like Moses says, flow, not show, right? Flows of information drive how living systems work. And without flows of information, they aren't living. In companies, the flows of information are material, commodities, energy, and information. Information has played third fiddle in almost all old types of companies. Information is basically how you manage your flows of what you really care about, which is how much material you have, raw resources, and how much energy you have, either fossil fuels or human beings, right? But information-first companies are NewCos because they look at the flows of information in markets and they remap those flows in ways that create more benefit. Think about Airbnb, right? The materials are places to sleep. The Hyatt company sees materials as, we got to put a big chunk of material in the middle of the city, and then we've got to use information to get people into it. Airbnb said, why don't we think about new ways that we can flow information around and get people out of the center and into the living city? So they remap the information flows of hospitality. That's a NewCo approach. How are people managed? Well, hierarchically in a command-control environment that is really a complete straight line from World War II through mass consumer, command control. I'm in charge, I'm your boss. But we learned from places like Google, and if you just see behind there that little picture that you can't really see, that's the new Googleplex. Everyone's doing yoga, which is apparently big at Google. We'll find out when we have our president of Google from Canada come out later. But trust-based management says, we trust you to get your job done. Here's your goal, here's what you need to do. Go, do it. We're not going to command and control you. We're not going to watch every single thing you do. Just get your job done. And then, this is the big one. The number one maxim of every public company, almost to a one, has been for 5 decades, maximize shareholder value. Take capital from your market, extract it, and put it in the pockets of shareholders. That is an absolute inviolate law of a particularly Western capitalism. What we're finding is that there's a new kind of higher need, almost a Maslow's hierarchy. Profit is kind of table stakes. But what's your purpose? Why are you here? There's a great TED Talk, the 5 Hows. You know, why are you here? How are you doing what you're doing? The ability to bring people in to your company and express a purpose that aligns with the values of those people is a much higher reason for being in business. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Did we click? There we go. I think there's 4 big drivers of what I like to call the NewCo narrative, the big story that's pushing a new kind of business. And it has to do with tech. We talked about that. It has to do with a generational handoff or bridge. It has to do with cities. And it has to do with what I like to call an existential crisis in the making. So each in turn. Used to be that if you had to start a tech company, you had to go to the Silicon Valley, because that's where everybody was who understood tech. And if you wanted to do a tech company well, you needed to spend tens of millions of dollars to create a full-stack company that could have the servers and the coding and all that stuff. It cost tens and tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. But recently, in the last 5 years, really the acceleration has occurred. Technology is now a horizontal enablement layer across all of society, and every single economic sector is leveraging technology as a commodity service. That allows companies to spring up everywhere there are resources that really matter, human beings and capital, and a policy framework that allows that company to reliably, continue business. That means the great cities of the world, right? That's where all those things are. And technology is no longer this vertical over here. It's a horizontal enabling everything, kind of like the interstate highway system. People in tech don't like to hear that, but I think it's true. Secondly, I think it's really interesting. How many of you consider yourself millennials? Let me see you millennials out there. Do you like that, or you're okay with it? Now, I'm not going to ask how many of you are boomers, because we don't like that. I know that, okay? So I'll leave that one alone. We always talk about the generation gap. I think there's a generation bridge, because these 2 generations are the 2 largest generations to ever enter the workforce, to ever come into economic power, and they share an amazing amount of things in terms of their cultural experience of coming into economic power. They are the only 2 generations to come into power during an existential crisis of humanity. When the boomers came into power, right, it was the late 50s and early 60s, and everyone was certain that any moment walking down the street, poof, it might be over. Right? What happens when that happens? Sex, drugs, and rock and roll happens when that happens. It's like, screw it, let's have some good times, because everything's going to blow up, and the desk I'm under is not going to help. So now the millennials, on the other hand, have come to power in a different kind of crisis, a boiling frog kind of crisis. Like, it's getting hotter in this pot, and I'm not sure what's going on, but it doesn't feel right, right? Something's unsustainable about the way our economic engine is working. And it was almost an itch that you didn't know where it was, but it's getting more and more real. It's turning kind of into a rash. So when the boomers came into power, they were looking at the front of their career and saying, I have 40 years ahead of me, what's my purpose? I'm going to beat the Soviets, because those Soviets are the reason that I might blow up at any moment. How do I beat them? Well, our government said, you beat them with commerce. You beat them with raw, muscular American capitalism, right? Let's outcompete those guys. Let's outproduce, outconsume, and we did, and we won. But the legacy we left is now what the millennials have. We left an unsustainable, non-increasing return society. And we just did. And whether or not you believe that or not, or you believe the science, I don't care. What really matters, to me, is that it's a social fact. This is the number one issue of millennials. The number two issue is also a crisis of sustainability, income inequality. Those two things are social facts in our worldwide culture, and they directly affect business. Cities. One generation ago, 1/3 of humanity lived in cities. Last year, we crossed 50%, and by the end of the century, it will be 84%. We'll be at 2/3 within one generation. That's amazing. We have decided, for good or bad, cities are where we make our biggest problems, and cities are where we solve them. And cities are where groups of people get together, bump into each other, have those collisions that Tony Hsieh likes to talk about, and say, let's do something and make an organization to fix a problem. It might be a nonprofit, it might be a private-public partnership, it might be a commercial for-profit company, but companies are how we make things change in the most rapid and iterative way, and companies, I think, are on the brink of a big change. Lastly, the existential crisis. I've referred to it already. But when you have the Pope and the guy who spends the most ad dollars in the world saying essentially the same thing, we have a movement, right? And I think everyone is starting to wake up to, we need to change our business practices because our current practices are not sustainable. And that's okay to say that out loud now, because we understand we need to change, and we maybe can get kind of excited about how we might change. These all have one thing in common, which is they create new kinds of companies, right? The boomers are funding these companies that the millennials are starting. The cities are the womb of where these companies are created. And society at a tipping point gives us an animated force, a reason to do something. We want to change the world for the better. It doesn't have to be that we all have to start Tesla, right? We don't all have to start Charity Water. But we just want our companies to not be a net negative on society. Can we make companies that add some tangible benefit to the world? Millennials want to work at those companies. 77% of them say it's the number one reason they choose a company to work at or a brand to purchase. And those guys are going to be spending money for the next 30 years in what they think matters. So I believe a new kind of company is at the center of this grand narrative, and that's why we started NewCo. They're mission-driven, they're positive change-oriented, and they thrive in cities. And there hasn't been a way to really experience them, like experiencing a play or experiencing art, because the company, its beating heart is where they do their work. So wouldn't it be cool to go inside of them and see them as they're working? And that's what NewCo does. This is the inside of Airbnb. It's an amazing office in San Francisco. So, and this is the Michigan Urban Farming Initiative. So this guy is giving a tour during NewCo Detroit of a vacant lot. Wow, that's great. Except he's about to turn it into a farm. And this is happening throughout Detroit. It's being turned into urban farms. Super cool. This guy's curing cancer, literally. He's got 100 machines running genomes, 100,000 of them, and he wants to cure cancer. That's a pretty big mission. It's a for-profit company, but his wife died of cancer last year, and he was a senior engineer at Google, and he says, I have to do something more with my life. This guy has 2 young kids, and he decided to start an entirely new school system called Alt School. They have 6 schools going right now. And his goal, it's just a tiny one, you know, an excellent education for every child on Earth. You know, no big deal. These guys are trying to get animal proteins out of the food system. It's another small goal. But they've already figured out a replacement for the egg by doing a database, information-first database search for proteins that are similar to egg proteins, and they found them in a little bean seed in South America. And it's called Just Mayo, if any of you guys have seen that, Just Cookies, pretty good stuff. So how do you experience a NewCo? Have you ever gone to a music festival, any of you guys? They're awesome, right? Well, I got this idea basically going to Bonnaroo and Coachella, and I'm like, hey, wouldn't it be cool that instead of bands on all these different stages across like 2 acres or 10 acres in the case of Bonnaroo, you know, where you have to choose which band you go to, wouldn't it be cool if you could have companies be the bands? And you could go, instead of to a stage, you go inside their headquarters. So this is a schedule for next month. We're doing Austin, and you just pick your companies, like a music, and then you go around the city, and you weave in and out. It's super cool, lots of fun. We're also doing an editorial product with that. So we're covering this bigger story. It's called NewCo Shift, the shift in the economy, right? And this is where we have NewCos now, in 17 cities and growing, all over the world. Super cool, and we do it by partnering. And I'm excited to say that with Brett and his team, we're doing it here. And in September, you all have to come. And it's really easy to come because you're not going to a place like this, even though this is super cool. And I took a picture of it. You're going inside these great companies and seeing how they work and how they tick and who the people are and meeting them and asking them questions. No one's on their phone or checking Instagram during a NewCo session because you're in someone's home and you're engaged with them. It's awesome. So with that, that's my introduction to the NewCo narrative. I'm a minute and a half early. How cool is that?